Good afternoon, and welcome to the Calling from Space session, the last session as part of the Space Track at CES. My name is Sumaya Nadrali, and I will be your moderator for today's session. So before we get started on this conversation on direct-to-device connectivity, I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves, a bit about their company's role in the direct-to-device market, as well as share some major events, milestones over the past year as we reflect on 2024. So perhaps, Barbie, we could start with you and then make our way down the line.
Sure. So thank you, Sumaya. It's good to be with you again after a wonderful show in Paris back in September. So glad to continue the conversation. I'm Barbie Ponder, General Counsel and Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Globalstar. Globalstar is a mobile satellite services company. We've been providing mobile satellite services now for over 2 decades. We own and operate our own constellation of low Earth orbit satellites, as well as a global infrastructure of ground stations around the world that support that constellation. Importantly, about 2 years ago, we started providing D2D connectivity, and we've been doing it now successfully in 17 countries. I'm proud to say that now there are tens of millions, and I'm sure very soon 100 million people with Globalstar at their fingertips for critical communications, when they are in a rather desperate situation, as quite frankly we saw recently with our latest, the past hurricane season. So, we have used the same spectrum. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit, but 2024 was a very busy year for us. We're just getting started, quite frankly. We were successful in having the FCC reauthorize our Hiblio 4 constellation for another 15-year license term, and we'll be launching 8 new satellites later this year to help replenish that constellation. And finally, at the end of last year, we announced an additional $1.7 billion investment that we'll be making in more satellites and more ground infrastructure over the next couple of years. So 2024 was busy. 2025 will be just as busy. Thank you.
Thanks, Amaya. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Last. I'm the Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Iridium. I think about 70% of Barbie's introduction probably applies to Iridium as well. If you don't know us, we are a global mobile satellite services company. We have a fleet of about 80 satellites in orbit, in low Earth orbit around the world. We've been in the satellite business for getting on for 30 years, with the current constellation only being about 4 or 5 years old. And like Barbie's company, we provide direct-to-device connectivity today. One of the major changes for Iridium is that we're midway through the development and launch of a standards-based direct-to-device connectivity. I think that's what most people are here to hear about and understand. We've been a leader in sort of proprietary connectivity for satellite networks, and we've done that successfully across many major markets, verticals, geographies, both commercial and government. And we're excited about the opportunity to deliver that using more standards-based technology. For us, it's one of the probably 2 or 3 major capital programs underway in the company at the moment, so we're putting our money where our mouth is. Over the last year, we've successfully got Iridium's technology embedded into the next release of 3GPP, so we'll be part of the standards-based sort of kit of options that consumer electronics, chipset companies and the like can use. Looking forward to 25, we'll be over the air middle of this year. Testing and prototyping and what have you, and we're looking at market launch for our service by about the first month or 2 of 2026. So good to be here, good to meet everybody, and thanks for inviting us, Samai.
Thank you, Sumaya. My name is Parth Trivedi. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Skylo, which is a global direct-to-device service operator that connects cellular devices directly over satellite so that customers never lose coverage. Skylo wears two hats. One, we're a technology developer that builds the underlying infrastructure that powers the direct-to-device solution using the 3GPP standards with our radio access network and our core now installed and operationalized within half a dozen different satellite partners that we work with across more than 10 Earth stations around the world and integrated with multiple carriers, just as another roaming partner, if you will. So we play the role of a technology developer on the one hand, and the other role that we play is of a service operator. So we operate our service live over 4 continents, more than 35 markets. 2024 has been an incredible year with activating millions of devices on our network and scaling what is now the world's largest standards-based NTN. And we're really excited about the ecosystem that we're building, certifying everything from the chipset and the module all the way up to the device. And 2024, we called out certifications with Qualcomm's Snapdragon chipset. We announced partnership with Google across every Pixel smartphone. And announced a partnership as well with Verizon so that we can bring this incredible capability to the consumer, to the enterprises, and all types of use cases in between. And excited to share some of those stories with you today.
Great, thank you, and excited to have you all here as well. So I think Busy defined it very well. Lots of momentum in the D2D space in 2024. We saw that on the satellite infrastructure side, so with some of the companies like AST and Starlink launching in the past year. Also on the hardware side, so seeing more than 20 phone variants carrying both satellite and terrestrial compatibility globally. So as we look forward into 2025, we're really trying to see how we're getting the market developed and seeing how we can get services to market. So with satellite operators, turning these addressable users of direct-to-device services into subscribers, what are some of the benefits and shortfalls of these go-to-market strategies that you as satellite operators, network providers are adopting, whether it be taking a hardware approach or partnering with MNOs? So perhaps Tim, if you want to get started there and discuss maybe a little bit about Iridium's approach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know that I can comment too much on the shortfalls or pitfalls. I mean, I think we're in the very early stages of development of this fairly nascent market opportunity, both for, those of us in the satellite industry, but also for terrestrial companies and OEMs and chipset companies, anybody that sees the opportunity to develop and use this type of crossover technology. We have a particular view of how best we can go to market by sort of providing a vertically integrated networking experience. We will look and feel like a roaming option for any MNO in the world that wants to use our capability and service. That's important because the least amount of friction you can provide to the MNOs, the more chance they are of adopting your capability. But it's also true, I think, that nobody's going to be kind of taking the whole market here. This is going to be a choice of options for many of the mobile operators. We also have a pretty clear strategy that the market opportunity for Iridium is not only what you might consider direct-to-consumer devices, so to handsets, but also in IoT. For us, IoT has been a strong part of our market growth for the past 15 years or so. And while I think the business case and the value proposition for consumers can sometimes be questioned, nobody's paying much for this kind of capability today, at least not from a consumer perspective. It is clear that there's a very compelling use case and business case for many enterprises who've been crying out for a connectivity in places that they can't get to, whether you be automotive or oil and gas companies or many of the other industrial IoT markets. So I think there's money for everybody in that ecosystem. It gets tougher in the IoT market because there's less money to go around, but I think the next several years will reveal, who's got the right kind of go-to-market approach and who may struggle because of, what they control and what they don't control in that value chain. So, thanks.
Barbie, did you want to jump in there and maybe just discuss Globalstar's go-to-market approach, with partnering with Apple, but then also the path forward with the extended MSS network coverage?
Sure. So, Globalstar not only, owns and operates its own constellation of satellites, but we've developed internally quite a few of the products that operate over that system. One of those products we introduced in 2007. It's a consumer line of messaging devices called Spot that has been incredibly successful. And we've always tried to make a device, smaller, cheaper, incredibly easy to use. Pull it out of your pocket, push a button, let your family know, regardless of where you are, that they're okay, that you're okay. Or if you're in trouble, push the SOS. And so for us, when we were looking to, I think, sort of, pioneer path forward to direct-to-device, it was a natural fit for us to partner with a smartphone manufacturer because we all understood the enormous public benefits that would be available if we could essentially shoehorn our technology and connectivity, into one of their feature products. And it took quite a bit of work, but we were able to do that. So that's how we ended up in market. And now we don't have a go-to-market strategy. We need a stay-in-market strategy and execute that. And we're going to continue to invest in our network, innovate, and evolve, quite frankly, and expand and make sure that we're able to continue to provide that level of connectivity that people want when they're off the grid, either voluntarily or not, and at a price point that they feel comfortable paying.
I always like to start with the consumer experience and just by a quick show of hands, how many of you have an iPhone 14 or above or a Google Pixel 9? Got it. So those of you who have your hand up, I want to maybe ask you another follow-up question. How many of you have tried the satellite demo mode that is inherent in your device? Awesome. I'm glad I saw more hands the last time versus the last time I did this. But I think that making a consumer aware of this capability is step one. Right, it's latently present within your device. Now, how do you get access to it? What does the 1G of this look like when you try and access this non-terrestrial network for the first time? And how can we make it a predictable user experience? So that was the starting point, and frankly, a lot of the focus for last year and the year before was establishing a common baseline for consumers that they could start to take for granted. I was in Redwood National Park in California and texting over satellite with my family, and it was an incredible experience. But then as we think about the services beyond that baseline, peer-to-peer services, messaging, access to a constrained IP connection, etc., those start to look an awful lot like the carrier services that you're receiving today. So our approach is being a complementary support network with the carrier, being complementary to the services that they're providing to consumers from a 5G perspective, and making this appear to be minimal change in user behavior in accessing direct-to-device connectivity is a huge part of our focus, whether that's the work that we do behind the scenes with Android on the user experience, or whether that's the work that we do with the carriers around how they present this to the end users.
And I think that's a good segue into user experience and a lot of the conversation on what can users expect to see with satellite direct-to-device connectivity, right? Are we going to be able to see the same broadband type of capabilities? And that's a lot of the conversation as that kind of fuels into who's paying for the service. So how do you, as operators, network providers, intend on managing user expectations around D2D services?
I can kick things off maybe. So, the first thing is understanding the market really well, understanding the user really well. And I wanted to share with you the results of a survey that we ran across 1,000 Americans over the course of December. And we asked them some of the most common questions about the connectivity challenges that they face. And the insights were quite fascinating. So 2/3 of respondents, of Americans, across the country, by the way, not in any specific location, 2/3 of Americans face connectivity issues. And 20% actually face connectivity issues on almost a daily basis. I think the thing that struck me the most is that a majority of folks faced connectivity issues in their own neighborhood or on their commute to work or to see their friends and family. So it was a much higher percentage than I thought of. And the issue is quite real in terms of the pain point, that the frustration that Americans experience when they don't have reception and connectivity available. So it's becoming more and more real around how this gets presented and monetized. But then you also think about the use cases. To your question of, what are the types of services that consumers care about? The other question we asked was around exactly that. What are the use cases that you intend to leverage? 50% of respondents said that their biggest use case for non-terrestrial networks on their device was emergency contact. 20% of users after that said that their biggest use case was navigation, followed by texting. And interestingly, social media and other internet use cases was less than 5% of respondents. And the other thing I'll maybe just conclude with is we are seeing a massive shift in how content on the internet is consumed. So where previously you would have gone and browsed multiple websites to gain an answer to your question, you now have ChatGPT, you have Perplexity. You're able to turn a previously pretty heavy data-intensive experience into, frankly, a text-based narrowband experience. That matters. That's a very important change that has happened over the past 2 years. And because we're building greenfield networks that haven't been designed or been built before, we're able to optimize for these use cases. What will the next set of not just peer-to-peer, but also peer-to-AI interactions look like? So that's what we spend a lot of time also thinking about.
Certainly. And any other thoughts on managing user expectations as we discuss different D2D capabilities?
I think my first comment would be keep their expectations low, because that's probably where things will start. I mean, as Path indicates, initial use cases and the consumer's pain points, generally speaking, are around basic connectivity and often text-based or very modest data needs. We've known this from being in the satellite industry for 25 years to know how end users can find value without having endless bandwidth and capability. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be an aspiration or a target to aim for, but it's very different connecting to a satellite either 35,000 miles away or traveling at 18,000 miles an hour compared to connecting to a cell tower that's 2 miles down the street. But there are use cases which people will definitely pay for, find value in, even in those modest areas. The example of texting, the example of basic tracking capability, find your friends capability. These are all things that people will find useful, particularly in those areas where they have dead spots. But I think from a quality and customer experience, it will be different. We strive, just like Path does, to ensure that the customer experience is as close as possible to what they may have in their terrestrial use case. But we also know that sometimes it's challenging to make that happen when you're dealing with very different assets and infrastructure behind the scenes.
I think we're, at least I'd like to think that we're changing the public's perception and their expectations on what it means to be connected. I think that the public is going to expect that when they pull out their smartphone, it's going to work, regardless of where they are, regardless of their situation or their predicament, and regardless of whether there is or was a terrestrial mobile network that was there that was to support them. So I think that, that's where we're heading, a basic level of connectivity, at a price point that is affordable. And from there, we move forward with further work, further innovation and service. But I saw a report this morning. I think it's the first public report of a rescue via satellite in Japan. Japan was the 17th country added to the emergency SOS via satellite family of countries where it's now available. And I think the first report was this morning. And I think, it's just, people don't expect to be in a situation where they're going to need satellite connectivity, but they want it there when it's an emergency. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as satellite connectivity, becomes more integrated with terrestrial networks, we're looking at revenue generating opportunities here. So what are some of the key revenue generating opportunities you're focusing on, and how are you going to monetize that? So really trying to see is justifying the business case here. And curious also to know from an M&O perspective, so how they can be added to this plan of also expanding the services and profiting from that. So, so far we're looking more at the freemium model, or it's embedded in your phone. How is the path going forward with monetizing D2D services?
Maybe I'll try to answer this one. I think many and varied is the straight answer. We're building a capability, just like our current network service today, which will serve a really wide variety of different use cases, vertical markets, customer types. The consumer's one of them clearly, and there'll be a certain expectation there, and it's likely for most people that experience will be managed through their carrier, their M&O, their cellular provider. So you'll be bundled in as part of that package or part of that monthly fee. Maybe it'll be a small premium to have that capability. Maybe you get it because you buy the premium device. Maybe the company, a bit like the Apple example, they provide it free of charge for some period of time. Somebody somewhere will have to pay in order to monetize what the investment that companies like ours are making in that behind the scenes capability. Once you get into the IoT market, it varies hugely because there's so many different use cases and capability and business models that are being supported. Certainly there's an awful lot of very low cost industrial IoT, and if you're not within pennies of that expectation, even on cellular, the satellite industry won't be an option for many of these use cases. It doesn't matter that you're filling in the dead spots. If you can't get within spitting distance of their cost expectation, you're still not going to make the market. There's other examples where there is an appetite to pay more for connectivity, whether it be backup or for dead zones, and those will be the ones that companies like ours will all be trying to mine first. Where can we find the companies that are prepared to pay for that capability? We already do it today with our proprietary network. The market just gets a lot bigger once you're dealing with standards-based technology, and it becomes much easier for those companies to simply add you into the mix. So,
yeah, I would say that our approach is we're a wholesale B2B service operator, so we don't go to the end user directly, but we have a nuanced go-to-market approach as it relates to consumer as one vertical, as automotive as another vertical, and IoT or enterprise as a third vertical. And each of these has its own nuances as it relates to the type of ecosystem that you have to activate in order to successfully bring a user online. That looks very different across these three segments. So as an example, in the IoT segment, we have to work with a lot of module makers. And folks who are building these end devices, get them certified on Skylo's network. We run the industry's only certification program for NTN. using the 3GPP standards. So that's a large part of the supporting work that we do before carriers and MVNOs are able to realize the benefit of dual mode connectivity on these IoT devices. Then you have to also educate them on, hey, here's the developer experience that you want. Here's what you can expect. To Tim's point on setting expectations, you want developers to be able to access this new mode of connectivity much in the same way that they accessed cellular. What can they take for granted? What are the new things that they have to learn or set expectations around for their users? So that's the IoT market. For the automotive market, as you can imagine, we work with chipset companies, but also TCU vendors, folks who make the shark fin antenna in your car, all the way up to the carrier. And again, there's different types of services that these three markets are interested in relative to each other. And consumer market, I think, gets a lot of oxygen because of the fact that it's so near and dear to the device that's already in your pocket. But for that market, it's again entirely carrier-led, with supporting OEMs setting the baseline for connectivity that you can access.
Certainly. So we talk a lot about upside potential strategies with go-to-market, spectrum, momentum in the industry, monetization. Now, kind of looking at challenges in the market. So what are some of the biggest issues that you think will break or make the market and result in the success of D2D as everyone sees it? Barbie, you want to kickstart us off with some of the challenges that you see?
I guess, we're Globalstar and Iridium are pioneers in MSS. We've been doing this a while. And I think one of the challenges is, where are we not, right? We have mobile satellite, MSS spectrum, mobile satellite services spectrum, is ITU allocated, globally harmonized, and so we're able to serve very large regions of the earth quickly with our capabilities. I think for us, one of the challenges is to continuously open up new markets in new regions to our services that historically have not been perhaps as welcome. And so that for us will be, I think, a major focus over the next couple of years as we move forward with our D2D connectivity and an enormous amount of public benefit that comes with that to open quite frankly countries that have not so far we have not been able to serve so far.
I think Barbie touched on regulatory. I'll perhaps build on that and say that it takes a village to go to market. In telecom, it really takes a huge amount of work to build an ecosystem that results in a predictable, reliable experience for the end user. And doing that is challenging. You're getting multiple different behemoths in line to activate a solution with a particular standard is not easy. And the second thing I'll say is that usage is very closely tied to user experience. So as an example, how can we make access to even a basic service like messaging as frictionless as possible? How can we end up, in fact, as part of our roadmap, how can we end up in a future scenario where the phone rings while it's in your pocket as you're in your car driving at highway speeds? Enabling that requires a ton of work. And of course, there's technical challenges involved, but I feel, and given my experience in this so far, working with the ecosystem and bringing a predictable user experience online that you can take for granted is super difficult.
Tim, anything to add on to that?
I think one of the challenges we have as an industry is to not oversell the opportunity. I mean, we obviously want to encourage as many, participants in this ecosystem that feel they can get value from having satellite connectivity as part of the solution, but we shouldn't be overselling that because there are certain capabilities that are currently out of reach of satellite operators, the technology that's available today. That doesn't mean you can't dream and try and aspire to something, but I think having some realism about what capabilities and use cases are available is kind of important, because we can burn a lot of goodwill and a lot of reputation in the market by promising the earth and only delivering knee-high level services. Beyond that, I think spectrum broadly for the industry, it's the same challenge in the terrestrial world. Spectrum will continue to be, I say a challenge, it'll be a challenge because A, there's never enough of it to go round. B, not every spectrum is equal to each other. Different capabilities, different services are possible. And there's also a lot of different competing use cases for that spectrum. Even within the satellite world, companies today are trying to find ways to monetize that spectrum, and what today might be a apparently attractive D2D use case tomorrow might become very attractive to monetize in a different way. So I think we have to figure out fairly quickly how to monetize it confidently. Otherwise, that spectrum is going to get repurposed into other things, other use cases, other industries. So.
Absolutely. And before we carry forward to some of the other topics, just going to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have for our panelists. Yep, in the back. I could either pass you the mic, or if you can project loud enough, then.
Yeah, I'm wondering, right now it sounds like, the focus is providing text or other low data uses, but eventually it would seem like consumers will dream about voice and faster connectivity. Will the result simply be that the satellites will need to get bigger and bigger? Is that sort of an inevitable, outlook if you're looking out 3, 4, 5 years?
I don't know that bigger and bigger is necessarily the case. Certainly there are some aspects of satellite technology. There are operators today that have, more legacy technology that is not as capable. There are new companies like AST Space, that are promoting very large antenna arrays that can make up for some of the shortcomings of trying to connect to cellular devices. One of the things that, while this device in your pocket may seem to be amazing and fantastic and wonderful for engineers, and probably you guys will agree with this, they're really crappy at connecting to things a long way away. It's really difficult to close a reliable, high-quality connection with the quality of antennas and devices that are installed in some of these things. What makes it low cost and so competitive and easy in the terrestrial world equally makes it a challenge in connecting to assets like satellites. So I think some of that will be mitigated by different, newer, bigger satellites maybe. And some of it will be other technologies that evolve, other technologies within the core network. The good news is that most of this transition or appetite around to direct-to-device is persuading much of the satellite industry to move much of its core infrastructure more onto a standards-based footing. If you go back 20 or 30 years, all of the satellite companies in the world, pretty much most of them, had a load of proprietary technology all the way through their network, all the way from the core right to the edge, and that's no longer the case, including companies like Iridium. So I think that can only bring benefits of integration. Whether it really closes the gap to that consumer experience, I think it's going to take a little while to work through.
Any other questions from the audience? Yep, we have one in the back.
Happy to trade notes on that offline, sir. We operate with a fade margin of 7 or 10 dB, depending on the device. So it's not a flaky connection. When you use it outdoors, you obviously don't try this when you're deep inside your garage underground. But again, setting the right expectations is important. If you can do that, yeah, no, would love to trade notes after this. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious about the automotive industry. So I think we're talking maybe 2026 at the soonest for NTN to be available potentially in a car somewhere. But how do you see that unfolding? Do you see the carriers controlling that implementation, or do you see the satellite industry engaging directly with the automakers?
Happy to take a quick crack at it. I think that the things that play out in automotive are very similar to the way things play out in consumer with a lag. So I think you should expect to see a similar rollout as you have seen for consumer handsets, in that the first innings of this might very well be with a baseline that the OEM helps set, so that they can set an expectation with their drivers and passengers that, hey, you're covered with a certain basic element, irrespective of the market in which you buy the car or the truck, if you're talking commercial vehicle. Then the next innings is about those enhanced services, which, frankly, I'm an automaker. I don't really care about the services revenue that accrue from a service that an MNO in that country is much more adequately equipped to sell, distribute, and support than the OEM. So I think that's the way I see it play out.
Quick follow-up. Any thoughts on when a regulatory requirement for next-gen 911 or next-gen eCall might require satellite connectivity in cars?
It's interesting, and thank you for bringing that up. If you look at the regulations in Europe, as an example, they're very tight. So to meet some of those SLAs, it becomes incredibly important to have a high nines reliable network connection, especially when you're doing cross-border 3PL. In India, as an example, there's a regulation called AIS 140 that applies to logistics tracking devices and trucks, which is also quite stringent around enhancing the level of visibility, observability, and safety. So I do think that carriers around the world are going to take satellite more and more seriously as a part of the total offering to the 3PL providers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's more of a regional issue, that one. I mean, eCall in Europe has been developing a lot faster, even though it's developing at a fairly slow pace compared to the rest of the world. Similar to past Indian example, Brazil, for example, today, even prior to NTN technology, Brazil is a pretty fertile market for satellite connectivity because of the relatively poor coverage and the combination of regulatory action, insurance companies, and that kind of thing. So we're going to see these sort of different pockets play out, I think, and some of them will be a great use case for satellite, which will help pull this along. I think the one thing with automotive is true that I think the OEM in the consumer automotive world will try to control that experience as much as possible. So regardless of how they procure the connectivity in the back end, they will be controlling that experience. That will be very different in industrial markets. Industrial markets usually start out with a myriad of aftermarket solutions first because they can prove it out and move a lot faster than an OEM ever can. You don't get quite the same aftermarket kind of experience these days in automotive. It's not like people are buying GPS devices and stick them in their cars other than their smartphone. So I think it'll take a while for that to really take hold. But it's a market that I do think is still a significant one for this sort of satellite direct-to-device for sure.
Thank you. Thanks for the answer. So I think that actually takes us very close to the end of our session. So I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'd like to give a special thanks to our panelists for the insightful discussion, of course, our audience members for their questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at CES. Thank you.